The 2025 NFL Draft is almost here, and this year's wide receiver class, I think, is actually a little bit underrated. So in today's video, I want to do my final top 10 wide receivers of the 2025 NFL Draft. Subscribe if you're new. Let's hop into it. Now, before we get into our top 10, I did want to hand out a few honorable mentions who I did consider for this list. We're talking about guys like Jalen Noel, Jalen Royals, and Isaiah Bond. For most of these guys, they have certain attributes that I do like. Ultimately, they just could not crack my list. If you guys care to know why, you can drop a comment. I'll make sure to respond. But with that said, at my number 10, I have Kyle Williams from Washington State. Kyle Williams is about 6 foot, a little bit less than 190 pounds. He's 22 years of age, and I think the best way to summarize Kyle Williams in one word is a freak athlete. I guess that's two, but you get my point. I love Kyle Williams, and it feels like the entire NFL community recently has started to pay a bit more attention to Kyle Williams because in the PFF mock draft simulator, he went from, I don't even think he was even drafted or late 200s to now he's all the way up to 65. I think that might be a little bit high on Kyle Williams, but I can definitely understand why they like Kyle Williams a lot, and personally, I love him as well. So for each receiver, I went ahead and kind of broke it up into certain pros and certain cons. For his pros, I talked about being a great athlete. He's just a really solid athlete. Fluid mover, deep ball tracking ability, and I said he's dynamic with the ball in his hands. He does have some cons, though. He has sort of a shorter frame. He's a little bit lankier. His arms aren't that long. He also has kind of smallish hands. He also had some drop issues. I don't necessarily know if there's a correlation between some of his, lack of size elements with his hands and the drops, but I think most of them were just kind of concentration drops. And for the most part, that does kind of limit his receiver one upside. For me, a wide receiver one has to have a good frame and a good size. But again, he's at my number 10 for a specific reason. He is somebody who I want stretching the field vertically, taking a screen pass 15 yards, breaking tackles after getting a catch. I don't necessarily expect him to ever become that true wide receiver one in the NFL. But as a really good wide receiver 2 and maybe even one of the best wide receiver 3s, I would love Kyle Williams for a lot of different rosters. If your team is looking for somebody who can actually make a difference with their athleticism, then I think Kyle Williams is your guy. Let's say you're a team out there that has big, long, lengthy receivers, but really needs an athlete next to them. Maybe like the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have two outside wide receivers who want to go deep. Maybe you need a bit more of a speedster, a burner who can go and play a bit more on the slot and take a drag route 50 yards. That's the type of guy that Kyle Williams ultimately will become at the NFL level. But let's go ahead and move on to my number 9, and it's going to be Alec Ayamanor out of Stanford. Now, admittedly speaking, I like Alec Ayamanor, and I think he should probably be a second-round pick. I'm just a little bit lower on him than I am with a couple other receivers. With that said, if he does go over anybody within my top 8, I really don't have any issues with it. They're just all really close to one another. Alec is 21 years of age. He'll be 22 when the season starts. He's 6'2", 210 pounds. He has the ideal prototypical size for a true X or outside wide receiver. Kind of similar to Kyle Williams, I do not ever expect him to ever become like a true wide receiver 1. But in a, again, hypothetical word here where you have an undersized wide receiver 1, like, I don't know, a CeeDee Lamb or a Garrett Wilson who aren't undersized but aren't necessarily massive. And if you're looking for somebody who can be a bit more of like your T. Higgins to Jamar Chase, I think Alec Ayamanor could definitely be that guy. For his pros, I gave him good size, good speed. He's good against press man coverage, which a lot of these receivers in this draft class just aren't fully there yet, whereas Alec is. And I think in the run blocking, he can definitely be a plus run blocker as well. In terms of some of his cons, I think his ball tracking could definitely use some improvement. I also think he has some drop issues, and he had a low separation rate, which is ultimately kind of what led me a little bit more down the board. When you're a bigger receiver, you need to find ways to create separation, and if you're not creating that separation, that does leave me a little bit skeptical about how you actually perform at the NFL level, because against NFL cornerbacks, it's going to be even harder to create separation and even harder to, churn out big plays when you're going up against NFL guys. You see, when you go up against the Big 12 or the college level players that Stanford would play, ultimately what you're going to end up playing is guys who are bench players in the NFL or maybe not even in the NFL in general. So if you're struggling to get separation against them, how are you going to separate against true, legit NFL players? Now, I do think Alec has the size, the skills, and the ability to still succeed despite not being able to create a ton of separation. I think he can generate some, but I think he just needs to improve it overall. Like into the nuances of route running, I think could use some improvement, and just understanding how to create leverage and how to use his size to his advantage. As time will go on, he will become a better player. Kind of like Kyle, I see him as a really good wide receiver 2 to a very, very good wide receiver 3, depending on what your team already has and what your team already needs. Again, if you need a guy with size who can play on the outside, win some 50-50 balls, while also doing a bunch of other things too, Alec Ayomanor could definitely be your guy. Moving on to number 8 is going to be Jack Betch, the slot receiver, I suppose, for TCU. He's 22 years of age, 6'2", 215. Coming out of high school was actually a tight end, but converted to receiver because he wasn't the biggest guy on the world. And I think Jack Betch is a really bizarre player because he is technically more of a slot guy, but he also can play on the outside a little bit. I guess you could call him a bit more of a versatile option compared to the last two guys. I do think Jack Betch could play both sides, but I think arguably his best role is maybe a bit more suited as like an inside receiver, more towards the slot, or maybe on the outside here and there. Again, he has good size. For his pros, I put that he can be a big slot. He's got very sure hands. He moves well for a slot position player, especially of his size. And he's smart as hell. Like if they are running zone, he will find a hole in the zone to get open and be a nice player for a quarterback to just have a sure-handed guy. For his cons, I said he's an average athlete. I don't think his routes are incredibly nuanced, and I just don't think he's the greatest separator against man coverage, especially like physical corners that can get their hands on him early. So Jack Betch is just somebody who I think for him to succeed at the NFL level, he needs to almost play it like a true slot, like a Cooper Kupp or almost like a Travis Kelce-like player, where he ends up becoming the quarterback's best friend just because of how reliable he is. If I was Jack, I would instantly, whatever team drafts me, I would instantly get the phone number for the quarterback and instantly start creating conversations to watch film, to go out there and throw the ball with each other. Just that way the quarterback knows and understands everything that is good about Jack Betch's skill set. You want to become the quarterback's reliable weapon, and that's what I think Jack Betch can ultimately become. The reason why I have him a bit higher than Alec Ayomanor is just that I think his skill set, his tools will create a better connection with the quarterback. Whereas I could see a world where Alec doesn't create enough separation and plays a bit more on the outside, and a quarterback might be a little bit more scared, I suppose, to throw him the ball consistently, more so than Jack, who I think can just be such a reliable target in the underneath stuff. When it comes to like downfield presence, like winning 50-50 balls or running a deep post, I don't know if you're going to get too much of that from Jack. I think he can do it here and there, but I think he's a lot better suited to kind of play like a similar role to Jackson Smith and Jigba, but maybe just a little bit less nuanced as Jackson, because Jackson's a better route runner. But if you put him in a spot where he could just work in the underneath, find the zone, create separation with these rub routes and certain things like that, and occasionally run a nice little seam route here and there, or a corner or a post, then I think Jack will find a lot of success in the NFL. Again, I have him a little bit lower because I just do not see wide receiver 1 qualities at all, whereas I can definitely see a world where Kyle, in the right system, maybe springs into it, again, like a 5% chance. Same thing with Alec. I think it's a small chance, but I think there is a chance. Whereas for Jack, I think he is just a really impactful wide receiver 2, who could also play a wide receiver 3 role depending on who you already have. Let's now move on to Trey Harris at number 7. This was somebody who kind of was all over my board throughout the entire offseason and even during the season. I didn't really know what to think of Trey Harris just because the physical look, the way he plays, the way that Ole Miss utilized him, you would think that he could end up being like a true wide receiver 1. But I think his upside is there. It's just that I really worry about what his floor is. Like, I don't think his floor is as safe as some of these other guys I've already talked about, but I think his ceiling is a lot higher than these guys I've already talked about. I think for Trey Harris, he's a little bit older, 23 years of age, 6'3", 210 pounds, was Ole Miss's technically go-to guy. If you guys know anything about Ole Miss, it is a scheme where everything is kind of a one-read system, and sometimes the one read was a go route by Trey Harris or a deep post by Trey Harris. And even when Trey was double covered or triple covered, sometimes Jackson Dart would still throw that thing. And more often than not, Trey Harris would make a play on the football. So I think that kind of tells you just how much of a good player he can become. The problem with Trey Harris is because of this system and the way that he was utilized, he's just not very nuanced within the position, which is something that you want to have if you are going to be an older prospect. He's just not quite that. For his pros, I said he has good size. He's a really solid athlete. I think he's a deep ball monster. Again, Jackson Dart would just throw deep balls all over the field to him. And I said he changes his speed quite nicely within his routes. For his cons, his route tree is seemingly limited. I just don't think he's had the experience of running a deep route tree, which you probably want to have if you're going to become a wide receiver 1 or 2. He also dealt with a few injuries throughout his career. His route running nuance is extremely limited, which we kind of talked about. And against physical press man coverage, he can definitely struggle against them. So again, this one is a bit more of a projection player. I think that he is a kind of a full-on project who will instantly step in as like your wide receiver 3 or 4 and be a really capable deep route runner, like running go routes, running deep posts, running deep corners, who's just very limited with what he can do in the intermediate to underneath, which is why he's a project player. If you can develop him nicely, help him understand the nuances better, I think he has the athleticism, the skill set, the physical feel for him that I think he can become a really good wide receiver 2. Wide receiver 1 is a little bit rich for me, but again, it's just really hard to find guys who are of his size, who look like him, who play like him, who also can just do some of the most incredible things down the field. Like Theo Maynor, Kyle Williams, Jack Besh, those guys don't do what Trey Harris can do down the field, but they could do a whole heck of a lot more in the intermediate to underneath. So it's kind of pick your poison with Trey Harris. I'm banking on the upside. I do believe that he can end up becoming something special. It just comes down to, will a team have patience on him, and can he actually develop? Because if he doesn't develop, then I don't know what he's going to look like at the NFL. Real quick, before we get to my number 6 player, I did want to give a quick shout out to a new channel of mine. I am working on a podcast called First and 10, where we've already done my top 10 rankings in a longer format. So if you guys want to hear a bit more context behind each player, myself and my friend talked about our top 10 wide receivers. So I'll have it pinned up in the description and in the comment section below. So just feel free to check it out. I'd really appreciate it. With that said, at my number 6, this one might feel a little bbit low, but I think once we get to number 1, you guys could potentially understand why. I got Luther Burden out of Missouri. Luther Burden is a case of 1 year looking like the best receiver in the NFL or in the college football level to the next year not looking like the same guy. Now in 2023, he was statistically much better. He had 1,200 yards, 86 receptions, 9 touchdowns, whereas you compare that to last year where he just had 61 receptions, 676 yards, and only 6 touchdowns. Arguably the biggest drop-off of his production last year compared to this year was last year 14.1 yards per reception, this year 3 less at 11.1, meaning he's doing a lot more work underneath and not creating as many big plays. I think there's a tale of two sides with Luther Burden. If you do believe in the 2023 version coming out at the NFL level, then he's definitely worth a round 1 pick. But if you think that 2024 is a bit more of who the guy is, then I think arguably he should probably fall to a day 2 pick. I am personally of the belief that he in 2024 was not the square reason for why his productivity lacked. I think in some ways the injuries at the quarterback position, the play of the quarterback position was just really bad all year long. And I also do think that I don't think the coaching staff really put Luther Burden in a place to seriously succeed. He played a bit more on the outside at times in 2023, whereas for this year, he was almost exclusively within the slot. Like, yes, he occasionally would go on to the outside, but for the most part, really just stayed within the slot. And I think that did kind of limit some of what Luther Burden can ultimately do as like a true outside receiver. But I also feel like they didn't really ever adjust, the coaching staff I'm talking about, and in some ways Luther Burden. It felt like the competition that they were going up against consistently found a way to keep Luther Burden from getting the ball or creating big dynamic plays, whereas the coaching staff nor did Luther adjust to what the defense was presenting, and it ultimately kind of led to kind of a down year for Luther. In terms of some of his pros, though, I said he's a fantastic athlete with playmaking skills, fantastic with the ball in his hands in terms of yak, and I think he has some level of versatility to play within the outside and within the inside, as we kind of saw in 2023. For his cons, I don't think he's a plus in run blocking. In fact, I think he's very poor at it. He had some drop issues in 2023. This year was a little bit better, but still had a couple drops on film that you'd want to see cleaned up. In his route running, I think he could be a little bit inconsistent, especially with effort when the ball's not actually going to him. And even as an outside receiver, I do think he's a little bit limited in that role. With that said, he is really the first player of this list that I've talked about so far where I do say a legit path for him to actually become a wide receiver 1. Like, his athletic and physical profile is of the wide receiver 1 type. It just comes down to, can he kind of return back to form in 2023, which I think what you'll see is whatever team ends up taking him, whether it is in round 1 or round 2, they'll probably look at both 2023 and 2024 for Burden and see what situations, what moments did he have the most success in, and they'll probably just take those moments and implement them to try to give Luther Burden as much of a chance to succeed as physically possible. So I think Luther Burden will succeed. I think he's a fantastic player that, again, athletically speaking, is really awesome. And I just want to see a bit more from that 2023 version last year than we actually saw what happened in 2024. For me, he's a little bit lower on my list, not necessarily because I didn't love what I saw in 2024, more so that I just loved what I saw from these other receivers a little bit more than Luther Burden. So just take that as you will. Yes, he's at my number 6, but would not be surprised one bit if he ends up becoming the wide receiver 1 of this class. And also, not to mention, I think the receivers in front of him are like, the margins between them are super small. So if you say that Luther is the 4th or 5th best receiver, I'll say sure, that I have no issue with that. But we'll go ahead and move on to my number 5, which is going to be Emeka Egbuka. He is 22 and a half years of age, 6'1", 205 pounds. You just don't find smart players that are as safe and sound as Emeka Egbuka. Like, he is a high floor, low ceiling guy. He can easily step into your team, and I feel so certain that he's going to be a dominant wide receiver 2 to a very solid wide receiver 1 for whatever team takes him. It just kind of comes down to, I just don't think his ceiling to be an elite wide receiver 1 is as high as some of these other receivers on my list. So that's kind of what drags him down a smidge. But I just think that if you're getting Emeka Egbuka, you're going to get somebody who's going to be a absolute positive in whatever role you use him at within your receiving core. He can be your outside guy who does a couple things within the inside as well, or he can just simply be a slot receiver and be incredibly savvy there. For the pros of Emeka Egbuka, I say he's got good size. He's unbelievably smart. There's a play, I want to say it was against Texas or maybe it was against Notre Dame, I'm not too sure, where he basically calls out a route to either himself or Jeremiah Smith. I don't understand the full context. This is like 3 months ago, so I don't remember everything. But he explicitly called it out, and they ran the exact same play, and it went for a touchdown. So that just kind of tells you just how smart and how well he sees the field for Ohio State and for whatever team will get him. I said he understands the details of route running, understands the details of how to create space and create separation, as well as how to use his hands. And of course, kind of going along with that, he definitely can create space, especially when he's a bit more underneath. For his cons, he's an average athlete. He's not necessarily an explosive guy. He's not a 4.3 burner. He'll run like a 4.4, 4.5 for you on the field. I think on the field, he looked a little bit slower for me, so kind of keep that in mind. In terms of like cutting and getting in and out of breaks, he could just be sort of average at that. Like, he doesn't have that elite stop and go ability like certain other receivers have, which kind of comes down to, again, the whole athleticism departments. And I said against physical or more heavy press man corners, especially within the slot, he can kind of struggle to create some space with them and create separation. So again, if you're playing within the slot, you're not typically going to see press coverage on a slot receiver. It's just pretty hard to do. But if there is ever a scenario where he's on the outside and he has to create separation against a handsy physical corner, he can sometimes struggle. Again, my thought process on Emeka, he's going to be a dominant wide receiver too, that kind of like Jack Betch is just going to become a quarterback's best friend. Any team that gets him is going to get somebody who immediately steps in, plays a very solid role, and will just be the perfect number 2 or even number 1 option for a good quarterback. So I like Emeka Egbuka. He's in my top 5. Moving over to number 4 is going to be Jaden Higgins, the wide receiver out of Iowa State. It feels like Jaden Higgins is moving up players or people's draft boards, but it also does feel like there are some people who just do not think that Higgins will turn out to be anything too special. My thought process on Higgins and why I have him above Emeka and Luther Burden, again, we're talking margins super small here, so I'm just kind of nitpicking here. I just like the size element of Higgins a lot more, and I just think that he can have a higher ceiling because of his size. He's 22, 6'4", 215, and his skill set, I think, is super translatable to the NFL level. So for his pros, of course, we talked about his size. I think he's also a very solid athlete. Route running wise, I think he is unbelievably nuanced within the route running department. Compare that to other receivers, especially down the board, who aren't as nuanced. Higgins is definitely a lot more nuanced. And against press corners, against something that a lot of other receivers in this list couldn't do well against, I think he's actually really good against them. For his cons, he doesn't seem like he has a second gear to him, nor do I think he'll ever be great with the ball in his hands in terms of yak or anything like that. And in terms of like his ability to just stop on a dime, it's not the greatest. So those things all kind of limit him as a player just because his athletic profile isn't like unbelievable or anything like that. I think he's a solid athlete, but he's not Luther Burden. All right, he's not Travis Hunter or anything like that. But what I love about Jaden Higgins is I know what I'm getting. I'm getting a long, physical receiver who can be more of a possession guy, who's going to get open, understands how to get open, can create space. And again, when you want to be a safety blanket for a quarterback, like Jaden Higgins is what you kind of want with that. Is he ever going to dominate the competition with his ability to just create big time plays? No. But if you're telling me that I can get him in round 2 or round 1 late, of course, and he could be my wide receiver 2 alongside a shiftier, dynamic wide receiver 1, I'll absolutely take that. Again, I've already talked about the same names here, but I'll mention CeeDee Lamb, Garrett Wilson. Both those teams need receivers. I think Higgins would almost be so perfect for them because of what his skill set is, his size, and just playing alongside those guys would just help Higgins out as well. So I have him at my number 4 for those reasons. However, moving on to number 3 is going to be Matthew Golden. Now, I know you guys see that flag right there. Yes, I am a Texas Longhorns fan. But as I do with all my positional rankings, I always try to take the logo off the helmet, and that's what I've done here with Matthew Golden. Now, Matthew Golden, admittedly speaking, I have been high on him since like week 4 of last year, of course, in the college football season. It wasn't until recently where I really started to continuously push him up the pecking order of my big board. And right now, Matthew Golden is my number 3 receiver. Again, he's very close to being a 4th or 5th guy on this list. Again, the margins are super small here, but I just like Matthew Golden for a number of different reasons. We'll talk about that now. He's only 21, so he's a little bit younger. 6 foot, 195. I think he's maybe a bit more like 5'11", but sure, we'll say 6 foot. I have no issue with that. Last year for Texas, it was a interesting season, to put it kind of bluntly. He started the season off as the number 2, maybe even the number 3 option for Quinn Ewers behind Isaiah Bond, and at certain points DeAndre Moore, Ryan Wingo, and Jonte Cook kind of played that number 2 role. But then eventually, as the season went on, it became more clear and more obvious that Quinn Ewers had a connection to Matthew Golden that he didn't have with other receivers. It just felt like those two not necessarily got along better, but just had a better feel for each other's games a lot more. And that's what I liked the most about Matthew Golden, especially later in that season. So in terms of his pros, I said his route running is very nuanced. Now, at times he can be a little lazy, especially when the ball doesn't get to him. But in terms of when he knows he's going to get the ball or he's going to get looked at, his route running is very nuanced. He has some twitch to him. He's savvy in certain ways. I said his hands are very sure. Yes, he had a couple drops this year. I think he had 4 drops, but I never really noticed his hands being anything bad or anything, especially, in a contested catch situations. Like, he, most times than not, ended up winning those plays. And I just said for his last pro, kind of going back to the route running stuff, he understands the nuance of the game. He knows how to create space. He understands leverage and how to use his size to his advantage. For his cons, I don't think he's ever going to be a plus run blocker or anything like that. I think focus could definitely use some work. Again, he had a couple drops that I don't know if they were really his fault, because some of them were heavily contested, and it's just like, Quinn, why you're throwing that? But he also maybe had a few focus drops here and there. And just as I mentioned, when he's going through his routes, like, just go 100%, foot on the pedal at all times. Sometimes he'd kind of slow up towards the end, especially when he knew the ball wasn't going to him. And against like sticky, physical man coverage corners, he can kind of struggle to create separation, which is bizarre because he's a solid athlete and he can be a really solid route runner. He just doesn't create the separation too often against really physical, handsy corners. But again, like against zone or softer corners, he's really much better against them. For Matthew Golden, I view him as being somebody who has the ceiling to be a wide receiver 1, but I think is more likely better suited to be a really, really good wide receiver 2. He can play in the slot a little bit, but I think he's better suited on the outside. And if you need him in the punt return game, in the kickoff game, he has some experience against that as well. So in terms of why do I have him above guys like Higgins, Burden, and Emeka Egbuka, I just think it comes down to ceiling for him. Again, we're talking about margins that are super thin, but I just trust Matthew Golden to hit his ceiling a bit more than I do with these other receivers. Like, I could see a world where Higgins doesn't end up ever becoming a number 1 option just because of his, average athleticism. Same thing with Emeka Egbuka. I just maybe think he might stick a bit more in the slot because of his athleticism. And then for Luther Burden, I think he's a bit more likely to not be a wide receiver 1 because maybe 2024 is a bit more of who he is. Whereas for Matthew Golden, he's playing the best football of his career. He's also a little bit younger. And I think whatever team will get him will understand who he is a bit better as a player and could utilize him in a way opposite of a number 1 receiver who can really make Matthew Golden a serious threat at the NFL level. I also do think in a world, if your team doesn't have a number 1 option but has like a couple really good number 2 options, I think Matthew Golden could very well end up being the guy that comes out of that bunch and ends up being the best of those group of guys. So you look at a team like the Green Bay Packers who need a number 1 option, maybe Matthew Golden could very well be that guy. So that's kind of why I have him at number 3. In terms of my number 2, I have Tetairoa McMillan, the wide receiver out of Arizona. Tetairoa McMillan has unbelievable size, 6'5", 212 pounds, just 22 years of age. There's a lot of arguments and debates about who Tet McMillan is, whether he's a good receiver, worthy of a top 10 pick, or whether he should fall late into the first round. I think a lot of them are unwarranted in some ways. I think a lot of it is just because you see somebody who's 6'5", 212 pounds, who doesn't play like he's 6'5", 212 pounds. Like, people see that size and they instantly think, oh, he should be DeAndre Hopkins, he should be Calvin Johnson, he should be those sort of guys. But that's not really his game. He's a bit more of like a possession receiver more than he is like a 50-50 ball winner. Now, he can win 50-50 balls. He's proven that at the college level against really good players. But he's a bit more of like somebody who, honestly, is a bit more of a possession guy, yards after catch guy, which is a little bit weird for somebody who's 6'5". For his pros, I said he has great size, good speed. He's really good with the ball in his hands. And as a route runner, he is extremely solid. He kind of understands the nuances quite well. For his cons, I said he doesn't play to his size too often. Sometimes when you're 6'5", you just need to use your size a bit better. And I saw occasional reps there where Tet did not use his size to his advantage and just played it a little bit softer than what he probably should have. With that said, I think he was dealing with an injury this past year, so keep that in mind. Kind of going back to the injury department here, I thought his 2023 film was a little bit better than 2024. Not too much, but just a little bit better. Against press man coverage, he can definitely struggle against them. He needs to use his size a bit more to his advantage in those reps. And I think he has a heavy percentage of contested catches, which you just do not typically want to see. He also had a couple of drops. I think he had like 6-7 drops last year. But again, some of those were his fault. Some of those weren't his fault. And just again, contested catches, something like that can also technically count as like a drop as well, so do keep that in mind. But he's got elite productivity over the course of the last 2 years, over 1,300 both years, and even last year was dealing with an injury. He has the size, the speed, the ability to be a wide receiver one. The good news for Tet is that I don't think he'll necessarily have to be a wide receiver one. Like, I look at a lot of the receiver needy teams that are early in the first round who are likely to take Tet, and I think a lot of them just need a second option. Like, again, the Jets, they don't need a wide receiver one. The Cowboys, they don't need a wide receiver one. The Panthers maybe could need a wide receiver one, but they also have a couple of really good number 2 options as well. The Saints, I mean, I guess Tet could fill in that number 1 role, but he also could fill in that number 2 role because of Chris Olave and Rashid. So you're just talking about a lot of teams there that are probably likely to take Tet, that kind of put him in a situation where he doesn't have to consistently go up against like the best physical press man coverage corners, which I think will ultimately play to his advantage. In terms of like a comparison, like there will be some comparison size wise to T. Higgins and Drake London, and I could definitely see those arguments. PFF has him compared to AJ Green, which I think is a pretty decent comparison just based off of size and what he can do with the ball in his hands. So I love Tet McMillan. I think he gets a lot of hate that isn't warranted, and I think overall when it comes down to who he'll become at the NFL level, he will be a good receiver that will be either a really good wide receiver 1 to an awesome wide receiver 2. But he's not my number 1 because my number 1 is Travis Hunter. Hopefully that kind of explains why Luther Burns a bit lower down the board here, because I did consider Travis Hunter as a receiver. Travis is going to be 22 here very soon. He's 6'1", 185 pounds. For his pros, I said he's a playmaker. He moves unbelievably well. He's long and lengthy, and he makes the difficult look very easy. For his cons, he's a bit of a skinnier, lankier guy, so he has a slighter frame. Against press coverage, he can struggle against them. And maybe the biggest con to him as a receiver is that he might just not play the position. He might just end up being a cornerback. So if he ends up being a cornerback, then yeah, he's not going to be a wide receiver, and that sucks. But where it looks like he's going to go with the Cleveland Browns, it looks like he might play receiver more so than corner. So that gives me a bit more of a reason to put him on this list. Now, if he ends up going to a team like, I don't know, the Giants, who might use him as a corner, then okay, that kind of puts a bit of a hole in this argument here. But if he ends up going to a team like Cleveland that uses him as a receiver, then voila, he's in my top 10 for a reason. So just keep that in mind. Again, I gave you some honorable mentions too. So if he doesn't play receiver, then just move everybody up 1 spot and then throw, like, I don't know, Jalen Noel at number 10. So just kind of keep that in mind. But for Travis, he is just so unbelievably talented as a player. Like, he has some catches on film that are almost unhuman. Like, they just look so ridiculous. But Travis, as I mentioned, he makes the difficult look easy. If he enters the NFL as a receiver, he will instantly step into a roster and be their wide receiver one. A quarterback is going to love to throw him the football because he makes every single catch on the field. He's also incredibly dominant with the ball in his hands, so he can make big plays whenever the ball is in his hands. And even though he's not the most nuanced with his route running, he's just such a good athlete and such a good playmaker that it doesn't really matter. Now, yes, there is some nuance to his skills, but I just love the way he plays. I will say one thing that might hold him back is if he does go both sides, like play receiver and corner at the NFL level, which I don't think he will do. But if he does, then that could maybe limit him and his nuance within the position. That also could potentially hurt his longevity. So we'll kind of keep an eye on that one. But yeah, I have Travis Hunter at my number one. He's just such a good playmaker, makes everything look easy. So yeah, number one is Travis Hunter. And here is a recap of our list. If you guys did enjoy the video, let me know in the comment section below, as well as subscribe and hit the like button. Love you guys. Peace.